Hi, I'm Christopher, a research software engineer with Research Software Workshops, and it's a very warm welcome to Introducing Version Control with Git Part 10, where we're going to look at GitHub and backing up to the cloud. So the link to the notes is at the bottom, and if we look at the backing up to the cloud section, you should see a page that looks something like this. Okay, so we're in the version dir directory, our working tree is clean, and we have the files from the last section. So we've got our notes.md, background.md, and readme.md. I'll Control L. Now, a question you may have, and indeed this is a very common question, so well done if you've thought of this before, but where exactly are all of the versions in the repository stored? Where is the repository on my computer? Now, believe it or not, the repository is actually here within this working directory, within version dir, and it's a hidden file or a hidden directory within this directory. So if I type ls-a, ls-a means show me all files in the directory, including hidden ones. What you'll see is there is this special .git folder, which is within my working directory. And if I do ls.git, this sort of hidden folder, this hidden directory.git, this contains lots of stuff. And this stuff is the repository. This is how Git has organized all of the files and all of the versions within the repository. Now you can have a peek around and see things, but actually it won't make much sense because everything is kind of like, is organized by Git. And, it may look different with different versions of Git and with different computers, different operating systems. Now, this .git directory is where Git saves your entire repository for version dir, and thus it contains all of the versions of version dir that we've committed in this workshop. Now it's really important I should say this, you must not edit or change this .git directory in any way. You must not edit it using any tools or delete it or change it, because if you do, you will corrupt Git. Let Git itself modify this folder. So Git will manage it. You should never look at it. You should never sort of play with it. And if you do edit or change this directory, you will break Git and you will lose all of the old versions of your files that were committed to the repository. Now, one thing, because this .git folder, as we can see, is contained within version dir, this means that if I remove version dir, I will also delete the .git folder. That means removing version dir will remove the repository, thus I'll remove all of the versions of my directory as well. This means removing version dir will remove version dir and all of the saved versions, and it will be impossible to recover or restore the files. Equally, because this .git folder is within version dir on your computer, if you lose your computer or it breaks or the hard drive crashes, that also means the .git folder is corrupted, and thus all of the versions are lost. It's very important you understand that Git is not a backup tool. Your files are not being backed up. Your files are only being versioned within the .git folder within the directory. Now, of course, if you want to back up your files, you want to copy them to somewhere else, you could do that just by zipping up or tarring up version dir. So I'm just going to head up one directory. If I type zip -r version dir.zip version dir, there we are. I've now created a zip file which contains my entire directory, which contains all the files in version dir plus the .git directory, which means that then that can then be restored, and maybe I could copy the zip file to Google Drive or Dropbox or OneDrive or put it onto a USB stick. Equally, if I didn't want to use zip, I could also make a tarball maybe with -zcvf, version dir.tgz, version dir. Again, that's now created a file called version dir.tgz, which is a tarball containing that file. So again, I can back up my directory by just zipping it up or tarring it or copying it to another computer as I would do normally. But this way of backing up is not hugely convenient. It would mean every time I wanted to back up, I would have to remember to zip the directory up or tar the directory up, and then I'd have to work out a way of moving that tarball or that zip file onto another computer, maybe copying it onto OneDrive or Google Drive, etc. I'd have to make this backing up kind of part of my workflow, otherwise I'd risk losing data between backups. Now, an alternative to this kind of manual backup is you could actually have Git do the backup for you. So Git has effectively an inbuilt backup system that relies on Git hosting services. Now, Git hosting services or Git backup services, these are online services that store a backup of your .git folder. So the .git folder that is here within your version control directory. There are special commands in Git that then integrate with these Git backup or Git hosting services, and which make backing up the .git folder and restoring it later extremely easy and straightforward. Now, there are many online Git backup services. Indeed, you can run your own. It's very easy to set up a computer and run a Git backup service on a computer. It takes 10 minutes to set up. But equally, there are large online platforms provided by companies that integrate Git backup with a range of extra offerings, for example, bug tracking, issue management, release management, web hosting, etc. Now, the three most established large platforms that provide this Git backup service are GitHub by Microsoft, GitLab, and Bitbucket. Now, of the three, GitHub is probably the one that most people know. Indeed, some of you looking at this workshop may be thinking that Git and GitHub are actually the same thing, or maybe you didn't really understand the difference between them. That's not a problem. They can be kind of confused. To emphasize and remember, Git is the open source and free tool that provides version control of a directory. GitHub, or GitLab or Bitbucket, these are online platforms that integrate a free .git backup service with a range of extra developer tools. Now, I've worked you through this part. Now onto the GitHub section, and I would say GitHub is my favourite platform. It's the one I use by far the most, and I use it for a range of academic projects, personal projects, anytime I need to have a backup of my directories. Now, GitHub is free for public repositories, so a public repository is where anybody, anywhere on the internet, at any time can look at your files. And you can also have for free some private repositories. So private repositories, private projects are ones where only you can see the files. Now, if you want a large number of private repositories, private projects, you will need to pay for GitHub. Or if you want some of the more advanced developer tools, you'll also need to pay for GitHub. But there is a GitHub for Education that provides staff and students at schools and universities with free access to the professional GitHub offering, and that includes accessing organizations and also lots of free private repositories. Git for Education or GitHub for Education is free and easy to join, especially if you register through a university issued email address. I mean, literally, if we just open this as a new tab, this is the education offering, and you essentially just sign up on this page. It's very straightforward. Now, we're going to be using sort of public Git repositories for this workshop, and so you need to create a GitHub user account to be able to do this. So what you should do is you should navigate to github.com, and on github.com you will have to create a new account. Now I'm just going to sign out of my account here just so that you can see what the sign up page looks like. So when you go to github.com, you'll have something that looks like this. I particularly like this view, so you can actually see people working live, committing things around the world and saving things. I think this is a little fantastic little thing. You can sign up by typing in an email address, and then you click on sign up for GitHub, and that will then get you a GitHub account. When you've got your GitHub account, sign in, put in your username and password. My computer saves those for me. If you've set up multi-factor authentication, you will need to put up in your multi-factor code. So in my case, I'm just typing that in now. This is a one-time password that's used to make your account a little bit more secure. And once you're logged in, your viewing page, your login page will look very different to mine. So it's like a social site which connects together all of the projects that you're working on. So to begin with, if this is your first time on GitHub, you probably have very little that's viewable here. For me, I have a load of things because I have a lot of projects and I work with a lot of people on GitHub. Okay, now the first thing we have to do if we want to back up the .git folder of your version dir is we need to create a new repository on GitHub. So a new repository on GitHub is a new project in which we can back up a .git folder. To do that, we have the plus sign up here. If you click on this and click New Repository, that will bring you to this page. This is the Create a New Repository page. By default, you'll have your username here. So this will be your username. I've got my username here as Chris Woods. And you then have to choose the name of the repository. Generally, this is the unique name that will identify your project, your repository going forwards. Because we're working with version.dir, I'm going to call this version.dir. If you already have something called version.dir in here, you'll get a cross here, and you should name it something else. It doesn't have to be called version.dir, it can be called anything really that you want. If you want to add a description for the project, you can add one here. Maybe this is a project to learn Git and GitHub. And then here we choose between public and private. Now, as I said, public means that anyone on the internet can see everything in the .git folder. So it's completely public and saved until you delete it. Private means only you can see it, and of course the people who run GitHub may be able to see it. So in this case we're going to go public. You should not use public for anything you don't want anyone else to see, because it literally means publishing this publicly on the internet. Now, we are not going to initialize this repository with anything because we already have a version.dir that we want to back up. So in this case we're going to leave these as empty. When I click Create Repository now, it will now create the new repository, and this is the initial view when there are no files. There's no .git folder that's been backed up at this point. Now, GitHub is very good, and it actually tells you here how you can put files into the repository. Now, we have an existing repository and we are working on the command line, so we're now going to push our data from our computer to GitHub to back up our .git folder to GitHub, and here are the commands we need to use. Now, these are copy and paste commands. We don't need to really understand what they're doing, but essentially if I copy and paste them in, what it's doing here is it's saying I'm going to be uploading to GitHub at this address. You can see that's my GitHub username, version.dir is the name of the project, and .git because we're backing up the .git folder. Now, we don't need this second line. This second line is renaming it as the branch main. Remember when we renamed ours from master to main? You'd need to type this if you haven't renamed things to from master to main yet. And finally, this third command, git push -u origin main, is the command we run once the first time we want to upload to GitHub. Now, at this point, it may be that you'll need to type in your GitHub username and password. Now, I use Git a lot, so in this case it's not asking me for my username or password because that is already cached by my computer. And so it's pushed it, it's logged on to GitHub, and it has now uploaded everything, and it's copied my .git folder from my computer and it's backed it up to the .git folder on GitHub. Now, if you were asked for a username or password, you would type them in, but if you're using multi-factor authentication like I was for my account, then you have to go through some extra steps. We have the extra steps linked to on this page. So you can see here, if we go down below this point, this page gives you the instructions of how you set up two-factor authentication. And what it means is you have to create a one-time password that is used for your computer. Essentially, what you end up doing is from the command line, if we click on that, this is only if you have multi-factor authentication turned on, you need to create a personal access token, and you do that by going to your GitHub settings, and then under the developer settings, personal access tokens, and you would generate a new token which would then give you a one-time password you can use. You will have to make sure you save that one-time password, and you would use that password with your Git username instead of your normal Git password. Again, you only need to do this if you have multi-factor authentication turned on. Okay, so now that we have pushed our files, I've done git push and it's pushed the file successfully up to GitHub. If I now go back to my version.dir and I reload this page, what you'll see is we'll now get a different view. The files have now been uploaded and we can see the files here. There's my readme.md, background.md and notes.md. Indeed, here's the file, and there we are. We have the cat goes meow. Now, one of the nice things about this view is I can see all of my 10 commits, my 10 versions, and if I click on this, there we are, we have the 10 versions. And indeed, if we click on one of these, this is the version where the cats do not go woof, and we take a look, you can actually see you've got the equivalent of a git diff view where we can see the change that we made on that specific version of the file. So again, we have a really nice view. We can see all of the files on GitHub. Now you can use this GitHub interface to explore the files in the repository, look at the previous versions and mess around. But this backup is not directly connected to what's going on our computer. So let's say, for example, I'm now on my computer as I am here. Let's clear this screen. And let's say I now change my readme.md and I now have cat goes meow and then and kittens are cute. So I've now changed readme.md a little bit. Git status shows that my working directory has been modified. readme.md and my working directory is now different to the last version that we saved in the repository. So I'll now save this modified version with git commit -a, added information about kittens as the commit message. If I do git status again, our working tree is clean, but notice now we have this additional line that says your branch is ahead of origin main by 1 commit. This shows that Git knows that my working tree is clean because I have saved that modified version to the .git folder on my local computer, but it also shows that Git knows that my .git folder on my computer is 1 version ahead of the backup that we've saved on GitHub. And indeed, if I reload the GitHub page here, and we look at readme.md, this is 1 version behind. We don't have the kittens yet. Now the git command we need to run to push versions which are new on our local computer up to the backup on our remote Git server onto GitHub is the command Git Push. If I type Git Push, you may be asked for your username and password again unless it's being cached by your computer. But once you've logged in, it will then push this new version back up to GitHub. If I reload the page, there we are, that version has been uploaded, and we can see we have the commit now added information about kittens, and we now have 11 commits. And that shows that our new commit has been published, it's been uploaded from our local main in the local.git folder to the main.git folder on GitHub. And now if I type git status again, you'll see my branch is up to date with origin main. That means the version on my .git folder locally is now the same as the version on GitHub. Okay, so we've now worked our way through. Let's close this. All of these pages again, please have a go at this yourself as well. And we've now come to the last command, our 10th command that we've added to our cheat sheet, which is Git Push. Git Push is the command to back up the versions which we've saved locally and back them up to the .git folder on our remote Git hosting service. In this case, it was GitHub. So there are our 10 commands. Git init, start version controlling a directory. Git status, tell us what's going on in the directory. Git add a file to be tracked by Git. Git commit -a, save a new snapshot version of all of the tracked files within a directory. Git diff, show the difference between the files in my working tree and the last saved version in the repository. Git checkout, that's how we either move backwards in time, so the entire working tree backwards in time to see how it was in the past, or how we bring past files forwards in time to the present. Git log, that is the command to show the log of all of the versions that have been saved within the repository. Git mv, git move is how we rename files. Git rm, that's how we remove files. And then finally git push, that's how we push the latest version, all of the changes, all of the versions that have been saved locally, we push them up and back them up to our remote Git repository, our remote Git hosting service. In this case, it was GitHub. Okay, we're now on to our exercise. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to make some changes to background.md, commit those changes, and then push those changes to GitHub and check on the GitHub webpage that you can see the changes and the commit message that you used. Press pause, and when you come back from pause, I'll do this as well. Okay, we've now unpaused, so I'm going to have a go at this exercise. So we now need, let's clear this screen. We now need to make changes to background.md. Okay. And so I'm going to say here is a new line that we're adding. I think there should be a file about dogs and puppies. Don't want to be completely biased to cats and kittens. Okay, so we've now made changes to background.md. Let's see what they were with git diff. Yep, those are our two new lines. I'm going to commit a new snapshot version of this directory. Added a note to add more information about dogs and puppies. Save that. Git status, we can now see that our working tree is clean, but our repository locally has got one more version in it than the version which is on GitHub, the backup on GitHub. And indeed, when we reload that page, we can see we still have 11 commits. And if we look at background.md, the version on GitHub doesn't have that extra text. So we need to now push the new version that we created locally and back that up to GitHub. Off it goes. I don't need to type in my username or password because mine are already cached by my computer. And now if I do git status, we will see that my branch is up to date with origin main. That means the versions which are on my computer, in my repository on my computer, are exactly the same as the versions which are on GitHub. And if I reload this page, we should now have 12 commits. And if I look at background.md, there we are. It has the line about dogs and puppies. Now, quick warning, an important warning, public repositories are public. You can go to this webpage, which we can see here is chriswoods.github.com, chriswoods version dir, and then stuff, and you can see this file. It is completely public and visible to the entire world. Equally, you can see all of these commits. Completely public. Anybody in the world at any time can look at this unless I delete this repository. Because this is totally public and everybody can read it, you must be very careful not to push sensitive data to a public GitHub repository. Never push passwords or sensitive data to the repository. Make sure you never save a password in a version control directory, otherwise you may accidentally upload it to the cloud. Believe it or not, there have many security incidents caused because people accidentally publish their passwords in a Git repo which is made public. Equally, you must protect data which is meant to be private. So if you have unpublished research data or private data or data which is, say, protected by GDPR, or patient data or human data, or data protected by maybe a confidentiality agreement, maybe it's commercially sensitive data, you must never push that data to GitHub, to any private repository or public repository. As I said, if you push this data to a public repository, you're making that file and all of its previous versions public. And equally, if you do push this to a private repository, you may be violating terms of agreement with that data. So for example, if you publish it to a repository, to a service which is based in the US, in America, and the data is meant to be based in Europe, you're transferring data from Europe to America, which would be breaking the law. So only really use services like GitHub and Bitbucket and GitLab for data that is allowed to be public. Don't push grant proposals or research papers to public things. You can push them to private repos. Definitely don't publish or push data to that's confidential, patient data, human data, GDPR data, because that's really not allowed. But as I said earlier, it's very easy to create your own Git hosting service. It takes about 15 minutes, and indeed your own university or your own company may have a local Git service which you can use for backup, so you then wouldn't need to use GitLab, GitHub or Bitbucket. Another thing you need to be careful of is because public repositories are public and everything can be read, including those commit messages that we were writing. So for example, if I click here, you can see here is my commit message exactly as I wrote. Do be careful when you're writing those commit messages not to write and use offensive things and use offensive language. It's a really bad idea to be abusive or condescending in your commit messages, particularly as they're going to be public and they'll be put to a public repository. So please avoid making commit messages like fix this annoying piece of rubbish code written by someone, as it's public, that person can actually read it, and that could be quite hurtful. Finally, as a quick appendix, as you saw on my computer, on a Mac, your Git credentials are automatically saved onto your Mac keychain, and so those are basically protected by the password that lets you log in, as you don't really have to do anything to have your username and password automatically saved on Git. You type it in once, and then after that, it's always saved. You may find, I think, on Windows will also automatically sort of cache your username and password, but if you are on Linux, sometimes it won't, and it may actually ask you to type the username and password every time. If that's the case, you can actually tell Git to try and cache it by typing in this command here, or if that doesn't work, we have a link here to instructions on how you can try and get Git to cache your passwords. As I said, it is quite annoying to have to type them in every single time. The idea is that hopefully once you get it cached, then once you type it in once, then every other time you type it, it'll just be reused. In this case, this is the most simplest way of doing it, and this will only cache it for an hour, but that's kind of worth it. You only type it in once, and then an hour later you have to type it in again. Okay then, so that's basically taking you through all the GitHub section. Hopefully that was useful, and again, if you go onto the GitHub website, there are tons of learning material that you'll find here, and there are lots of people. It's a very sort of welcoming community. So with that, that's the end of this section. I look forward to seeing you in the next section.